This is 1059 The Region, where parents talk and explore practical, proactive, and evidence-based solutions. This is Where Parents Talk with Lianne Castelino.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Where Parents Talk here on 1059 The Region. I'm Lianne Castelino. Great to have you along. On today's show, Raising Neurodivergent Children. Our guests today are each mothers of children with autism. Meghan Ashburn is an educational consultant, a former teacher, founder of notanautismmom.com, and a mother of 4, including twins with autism. She's also the co-author of a book called I Will Die on This Hill. Her co-author is a writer and consultant appointed to the National Institutes of Health Autism Centers of Excellence Advisory Board. Jules Edwards is a parent with autism. She also has 3 children, all of whom are autistic. They join us today from Virginia and Minnesota, respectively. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
Meghan, I'd like to start with you. How would you describe your lived experience in general when it comes to caring for 2 children with autism?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I would say that my lived experience, we talk a lot about this in the book with different stories. It has been quite a journey of kind of getting a lot of misinformation and having a lot of confusion about how to support my autistic kids. And then after finding the autistic community, it really did help me kind of unlearn all of that and unpack a lot of the things that I had learned in the beginning. I would say that every day is different and that there really are just not enough services for families who are supporting autistic kids. So it's definitely been a journey.
Jules, could you describe what it's been like for you having 3 children with autism?
In a single word, I would say overwhelming. And all of my children are so very, very different. And they give a really great insight on what the autism spectrum really means. Because autism is a social communication and sensory disability. And there comes some emotional regulation stuff in that as well. And each of them have such different profiles that I really have to be a different parent for each child. And there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of learning that needs to be done in order to make sure that I'm supporting them the way that they need to be supported. And when I was diagnosed, I also had to learn about my own needs as an autistic person and my own profile and how can I meet my own needs while also meeting theirs. So it's just been quite the journey. And so now I try to make it easier for other families to have their own path.
Meghan, you talked about unlearning things along your journey. What do you believe is missing from the conversation as it relates to caring for an autistic child?
I really think a lot of the physical co-occurring conditions, that conversation is missing. All of the co-occurring conditions, really. I talk in the book about being dumped into the autism trash can after diagnosis. And basically that just means that once my kids were diagnosed with autism, it was as if nothing else mattered. And it was only treated as a behavioral diagnosis when there are so many other co-occurring conditions that impact my children in different ways. Because just like Jules's kids, my kids are very different. They have very different profiles. And I also feel like the communication aspect is not pushed hard enough and supported enough for families, especially for AAC access, which is alternative augmentative communication access. That part is missing as well.
Jules, you also have autism in addition to raising these children with the same condition. Can you tell us why was it important for you to be part of writing this book?
It was important because a lot of the time autistic people are left out of the conversation entirely. There are giant organizations that are dedicated to supporting the autism community as a whole. And a lot of the time, we aren't even included in conversations about our best interests. And one of the foundations of the disability rights movement is nothing about us without us. But somehow that escapes the discourse and the discussion about autism. So I feel like Meghan and I have grown to have a really strong relationship, and being able to model what we'd like to see others emulate is really important. So by being able to talk about our own experiences and our own relationship, our own journey, and how we started in a tough place. We didn't get along when we first met, and we both had the humility and the willingness to engage in discussions about how can we make this world a better place for not only our kids, but all of the children out there who are not supported the way that they deserve to be supported, and the families as well.
Meghan, your twin boys are almost 10 years old now, and lots has certainly changed in the space in the last decade. What, in your view, are some of the prevailing narratives around autism you believe still need to be changed?
I think that the most important one is that autistic kids are broken, and that they need to be fixed. That is probably the most pervasive narrative that's out there, and that's been out there since I even heard about autism, and that autism is a tragedy, and that autism has stolen the child from the family. I think those are the narratives that really need to change, like from the diagnosis day. Those are probably the biggest ones, because once parents start unlearning that and finding the autistic community, the adult autistic community, especially those who are non-speaking and those who are Black and brown and indigenous, like Jules. Like, I feel like once parents find them and see them as adults, that parents can really start unlearning that type of narrative, because it isn't a tragedy and it's not an emergency. That's another thing we talk about in the book. Jules does a great job at just dispelling that myth that autism is some emergency that you have to get on right away. And it's just not true, because autistic kids develop differently than neurotypical kids, right? They have their own timelines. They learn things in their own ways, their own unique ways, and on their own time schedule. So I think that those are probably the most prevailing.
We are in conversation with the authors of I Will Die on This Hill. Meghan Ashburn and Jules Edwards have 7 children between them, including 5 with autism. Jules, has it been an advantage or not living with autism yourself in the course of then parenting your kids with autism?
I don't know if it's an advantage or a disadvantage. For me, it's just part of life. I don't think that it's a strength or a weakness. I think that part of the best part of the neurodiversity movement, and that is a movement that says everybody has a different brain, and everybody is part of the neurodiversity movement, whether they are a neurotypical or a person with a typically developing brain or a person with a neurodevelopmental disability. But I think all of the differences in humanity is what makes us stronger as human beings. Because I have some really significant strengths as a person that a lot of other people don't have. And I also have some serious difficulties that a lot of people don't have. Like, for me, sending something in the mail is an accomplishment. And I did it today for the first time in like 2 years. I mailed something. Yes. But it's been interesting. And when we each got our diagnoses, for me, it was like the key to unlocking the supports that I needed, because I didn't know that I was autistic until I was well into my 30s. I didn't know my children were autistic. And when I found out, I was like, aha, now I can figure out how to better support all of us, because I just thought life was really hard for no reason. And then with the diagnosis, I was able to understand things like executive functioning, which is like the planning and doing of tasks, and being able to find out workarounds for things, or being able to assign tasks that I just genuinely can't do to someone else. Being able to understand my own sensory needs and, prevent sensory overwhelm, or have a plan for escape if I'm in an overstimulating environment. So having the diagnosis has been so instrumental in improving my quality of life. And it's also been helpful for improving my children's quality of life.
Was there a particular tipping point, Meghan, that prompted you to pursue writing this book?
So our publisher reached out to me because I have an online book club on Facebook, and it has about like 11,000 members, and we discuss lots of books in there. So the publisher reached out to me and asked me, would you like to write a book? And of course, I am a writer, so I have like several books in the works. None of them are even close to being done. But this publisher is they do more things with the autism community. So they wanted it to be autism specific. And I mean, as Jules said earlier, like, it's really important that when we're talking about autism or autistic people, that we should be including them, if not even having them lead those conversations. So it really was a no-brainer to ask Jules to volunteer Jules to write this book with me, because we do have, I would say we have unique perspectives in the community. And I don't know, I think that was just a natural thing for us. And in the book, we invited several other autistic people to join us in the conversation. And that was really important for both of us to make sure that everybody's perspective, or not everybody's, but there was a lot of different perspectives so that nobody was left out in the autistic community.
It's time for a short break. Our conversation about caring for children with autism will continue with our guests Meghan Ashburn and Jules Edwards, co-authors of I Will Die on This Hill. Stay with us. Where Parents Talk will be back right after this.
Want to learn more about the show? Email info@whereparentstalk.com. Stick around. Lianne Castelino and Where Parents Talk will be right back on 1059 The Region. Welcome back to Where Parents Talk. Listen live at 1059theregion.com. Here's Lianne Castelino.
Welcome back. The latest statistics from the Centers for Disease Control in the United States show that 1 in 44 children is diagnosed with autism. Those numbers are similar in Canada. Our guests today are mothers with 7 children between them, including 5 with autism. Jules, you described feeling overwhelmed earlier. Take us through the darkest period you experienced as a parent raising kids with autism. What did that lived experience look like, and what got you through it?
Well, that's a good question. Honestly, the systemic ableism, that was the hardest part for me. For listeners who may not know what ableism is, it's discrimination against people with disabilities. And sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's kind of built into systems. So for me personally, it was dealing with public schools for my son. And I detailed that a little bit in the book, respectfully to him, of course. But when he was in elementary school, about the first and second grade, just 2 academic years, he accumulated 169 pages of behavioral referrals. And that is an excessive amount. And he was not a violent kid. He was not making threats. He was not hurting anyone. It was really just a lot of micromanagement of his behavior. I would get phone calls for standing on a chair. I would get phone calls for erasing and rewriting homework. But because he's an Afro-Indigenous disabled child, they were not focused on meeting his needs. They were focused on managing his behavior. And there were so many days that I would come home and cry because I just wanted him to have a positive school experience. He went to school to learn and be supported in a positive environment. And I had to spend so much time fighting his school to make sure that he had what he needed and so that he was understood. And at the time, we didn't know he was autistic. Nobody knew. He was just labeled a bad kid. And he was on that path from that preschool to prison pipeline that occurs so frequently, especially for Black disabled youth. And it's something that we talk about in the book. But I also talk about it a lot, whenever I can. I do a lot of policy advocacy as well. But it's just not right that our little kids are being targeted and not building relationships with people who can really help them.
Meghan, can you recall a particularly difficult time as a parent trying to meet the needs of all four of your children while also supporting your twin autistic boys? Is there something there that stands out for you?
There's several, but I would say it was when the twins were really young, probably around 3. Neither one of them were talking by that point. And we were trying to get services. We've gotten an autism diagnosis, and we were trying to get services for our family. So we, the parent community kind of helped me figure out like different Medicaid waivers down here in the U.S. We have waivers to help us get those services like attendant care, because my kids weren't able to be in daycare at that time because no daycare will accept kids that aren't potty trained over a certain age. And it's a very young age. So it was during that time that I was applying for services. We were getting denied for services because in Virginia, autism is just a behavioral diagnosis. So it's not considered a medical diagnosis, which I know is just like, I didn't even know this back then. And that's something that we're trying to change in Virginia to make sure that those kids are getting the services they need, because it is a medical diagnosis. It does come with physical and lots of different co-occurring conditions that our kids need support and our families need support for. And so I think it was around that time, and I still hadn't even heard of the words AAC yet. And that really just irks me so bad to just look back at like how privileged I am. And, I'm educated, I'm white, I'm blonde hair, we have the best doctors, but nobody ever mentioned an AAC device to us. And so my kids were screaming a lot, and they were dysregulated, and they were unhappy. I didn't know about the sensory differences yet. So I was just kind of in a state of confusion because once they were, dumped into the autism trash can, we just didn't have any support. I didn't have any knowledge, and I had not yet found the autistic community, and nor did I know that they even existed at that time. So I think that would probably be the roughest point in this journey.
Jules, when you look back on it, what would you say has helped get you through each step of the way raising your 3 autistic kids?
I would say finding autistic self-advocates. There are so many autistic people who have done a lot of work to create resources for parents and for other self-advocates. For example, Samantha Kraft put together like a list of traits that a lot of people with autism experience, and that helped with some insight and understanding of different behaviors. One of the difficult things about autism is that people do see it as a behavioral disability rather than being social, communication, and sensory. So that means a lot of the time people are trying to manage behavior without understanding the underlying need. And my family has experienced that. When one of my children was very young, he did not speak. He didn't speak until he was about 6. So we had to use baby sign language. And we used other methods of communication. because for a lot of autistic kids, they just don't speak until later or not at all. And they need things like AAC or sign language or any other kind of tool that will help them. So being able to find resources out there that autistic people who have already gone through all of this process and who have done a lot of learning, that has been the most helpful tool for me as a parent, to learn from them, because I don't have the same needs as my kids. So being able to learn from other people who have the same needs as my kids has been instrumental for understanding them and supporting them.
Meghan, what can you offer to a parent who perhaps has just received an autism diagnosis for their child in terms of an appropriate starting point for them?
I would say to read autistic books, to read books written by autistic people, to find blogs that are run by autistic people, especially those who are non-speaking or BIPOC autistics. I would say start there. There are so many books out there, and that's kind of the reason I started the book club, and that the book club has been going on for so long. On my website, we have a book list for parents who are brand new to autism, like just a targeted book list for them, because there is so much information out there. And depending on what direction you take is the information that you're going to get. So if you go down one path, you might get this information. If you go down another path, you might get this information. But I think that the best information and the most valuable information is the information given by autistic adults. And, you'll hear sometimes, well, these autistic adults aren't like my kid. And it's 100% right? They are adults and your kid is like 3 or 4 or 5. So they are not the same as your kid because they have had 30 plus years to adapt to this world, to cope, to learn those coping mechanisms, and to, get literacy instruction and all of these different things. But I think that if parents start by learning from autistic people first, they'll be able to support their kids way better than otherwise.
Jules, any tips or strategies you could offer for parents who are given this diagnosis for their child?
Absolutely. So parents, a lot of the time when their child is newly diagnosed, they are afraid. And that is due to a lot of so-called awareness campaigns that are built on trying to stigmatize autism, really. And so the public perception of autism is flawed. And a lot of the time, the doctors who do evaluations don't necessarily know the ins and outs of things. They might recommend certain therapies without understanding them fully. And so it's really important to have a thorough evaluation that looks for co-occurring conditions like learning disabilities. I am very, very satisfied with our evaluations because they drew out enough information for my children's co-occurring learning disabilities that we could find the appropriate supports for them. We didn't just put them into a behavior management program, which is what often happens for a lot of autistic children, and then they're not even sent to actual school to learn. They're deprived of an actual education in favor of behavior management, or they're put into self-contained classrooms, which means they're only around other children with disabilities. So parents, it's very important for parents to question everything and do a lot of research before they commit to anything. I wrote a welcome letter to parents, and it's titled Autism Moon. And it's meant to be a gentle reminder, like, take a big breath. It's not an emergency. Your child is still the lovable, beautiful person that you knew before the diagnosis. You knew who they were before that piece of paper ascribed a diagnosis to them. You know what they like to do before bedtime. You know what comforts them when they're upset. So parents need to believe in themselves and not be scared into doing things that they don't feel comfortable with for their children. So I guess that would be like my biggest recommendation for parents with a new diagnosis.
Meghan, what would you like readers to take away from your book?
I would like readers to just know that there's more than the medical model. Because this book, while it's marketed to parents and autistic adults, it really is for the greater community. Like, it's for the neighbors, it's for the people in church or whatever religious organization. I want people to know that the tragedy model, or like the tragedy narrative, is not the only narrative, right? And that there are other conversations being had, and that the medical model is only just one perspective, right? And I want people to just to open up to other perspectives and to know that there's more to what they know, and just to be open to learning.
Jules, what do you hope readers of I Will Die on This Hill leave with?
So my biggest takeaway that I would like readers to have from this book is a sense of humility. And that's one of the 7 grandfather teachings, or the 7 sacred teachings of the Anishinaabe people. So that's one of my cultural teachings. And it's very important when you're someone who is trying to support somebody who is not like you, to be humble. And that is, it's applicable to raising children who are not your own race. It is applicable to raising children with a disability. It's applicable to raising adoptive children or foster children. As parents, we really need to be humble and learn what our children need us to be, rather than deciding, I'm the parent, I know what's best, you need to do what's best, what I think is best for you. And one of the things that I love most about Meghan is that she reached out to me with this great sense of humility. And she's like, would it be okay if I asked you questions sometimes when I'm having a hard time, if I don't understand something? And I was so thrilled, because a lot of the time, disabled self-advocates ask parents, like, ask us if you have questions. We're here to help. We want to help you and your children. But it's not very common that parents, reach out with that sense of humility and say, I would really like your help.
Meghan Ashburn and Jules Edwards, co-authors of I Will Die on This Hill. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insight with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Make-A-Witch, thank you.
I'm Lianne Castelino. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you'll join us next time.
Sign up for Lianne's parenting newsletter and so much more at whereparentstalk.com. This is Where Parents Talk on 105.9 The Region.